So I am actually got a paper to read, otherwise I can go on forever about Humboldt. The focus of my talk I'm calling Humboldt's Pocket Cosmos. I've become very interested in Ansichten der Natur. You've already heard quite a bit about it this morning, so here's a bit more about it. I'll say more about this in a moment, but I thought it interesting as I started anticipating coming to this conference. The title of the conference, Aspects of Nature, and the most popular translation of Ansichten der Natur is views, is aspects of culture. So we have a nice kind of convergence here, and I think one of the aspects of Humboldt that makes him most intriguing for those of us who are interested in the nature culture, the way they integrate, is it's difficult to tell with Humboldt which is which. So here we are, right on that divide. All right, the book that Humboldt always called his favorite of his many books was begun under the most difficult of circumstances. He had returned triumphantly from the Americas to Paris in 1804 and found himself no longer in the young French Republic that he had left in 1799, but in an imperial monarchy ruled by Napoleon. But Paris was still the scientific center of the world, and so Humboldt stayed long enough, enjoyed being lionized, before eventually returning to his home in Berlin late in 1805, where he complained about the cold and the isolation. But he stayed, and he was writing, working, planning all his new trips, and then suddenly he was trapped. On October 14th, 1806, the French forces attacked Jena, where they routed and destroyed the Prussian army, and less than 2 weeks later, Napoleon marched into Berlin at the head of occupying French forces. The king and his court, on whom Humboldt had depended for his patronage, fled. The Prussian bureaucracy, in which he had been trained, collapsed. Food prices soared, and many starved as the war reparations demanded by the French crippled the economy. The Humboldt estate at Tegel was looted. Most of his family's possessions were lost or destroyed. Berlin had fallen, and Prussia, his homeland, had effectively ceased to exist. Humboldt, the son of Berlin, for whom Paris was home, was deeply torn. The Prussians called on him to mediate between the two warring sides, a diplomatic role that finally allowed him to return to Paris early in 1808, where he remained for the next 15 years before returning to Berlin for good in 1827. But before he left Berlin on this diplomatic mission, he gave a series of lectures that he turned into a book. Ansichten der Natur, the first edition, 1808, which he dedicated to embattled minds particularly, referring, of course, to his fellow Germans in their common defeat, in their common anguish. This is a book of nature essays on steppes and deserts, cataracts, volcanoes, plants, drawn from his favorite moments in the Americas, brimming with hope and beauty and the aspirations of science. It was published in 1808. It became an instant classic, translated into a half a dozen languages. In 1826, it was reissued. He added 2 more essays. It was reissued again. And finally, 1849, it was issued in a 3rd edition in German. All these are the German editions I'm referring to, because the German edition was the source for the first English translation, which I'm putting up the title page for you here, Aspects of Nature, London, 1849. This is the Philadelphia reprint that I have, translated by Elizabeth Sabine. So we have this moment, this cultural moment in 1849, when not only was this book being issued in English translation, but also Cosmos, the first 2 volumes. So suddenly, 1849, 1850, there's a flood of translations of Humboldt available in English, the cutting edge of Humboldt and Humboldtian science. So we have not only the aspects of nature, but two competing translations. So you can compare aspects of nature. These are my old beat-up working volumes. Aspects of nature on the left, and also views of nature, translated by Elie Sauté, came out just a few months later. So a kind of interesting situation. And just for, oops, there it goes. The title page for the second of those, Views of Nature, is very pretty. And some Views of Nature by Elie Sauté, and the plate, the frontispiece, the full-scale version of that is, of course, on display now across the street at the art exhibit. So if you haven't been there, please do go and take a look. And to find, so we have the initiation of a kind of Humboldt craze. It had been simmering since Humboldt's visit with Thomas Jefferson in the White House in 1804, various phases and stages, but now it really goes for about the next 20 years, a kind of nuclear in the United States. This fact is very difficult to recognize because these books are very hard to get in English, these old translations, very hard to find, expensive now. So I am a member of a team that is now bringing out a new modern translation of Views of Nature, which I had hoped would be out in time for this event. It's still a couple months out, so June of this year from University of Chicago. So we're trying to bring Views of Nature, make it available for a contemporary audience. I think partly some folks were asking me at the art exhibit reception last night, if you're trying to get your first step into Humboldt, what's the one book that's a good introduction, a good opening? I would say this book is the place to start. It's got a lot of everything, and then you can move on into Humboldt from here. Interestingly, both Views of Nature and Cosmos, his two most popular books, began as series of public lectures. And it's interesting, too, to note that the Cosmos lectures, even today, have a kind of 2014 instantiation in the remake of Carl Sagan's original 1980 TV series Cosmos, which is playing Sunday nights, even as we are here. So Cosmos continues to get recycled in the contemporary imagination, although its makers have long since forgotten the Humboldtian beginning of it. Few have actually read Cosmos. And for one thing, it's big. Humboldt had planned to issue it as a single-bound volume, but the manuscript grew so long that the binder had to split it into two volumes, which unfortunately divided Humboldt's vision in two as well. And to this day, the second volume's brilliant cultural history of the concept of nature, which he meant as the culminating and integrating lens for the whole work, is widely ignored in favor of the first volume's spectacular journey to the stars. So the point of Cosmos had been to demonstrate how utterly these two aspects of nature, that is physical nature and human culture, were really one kind of immensely old and many-folded whole. And a slight digression here, since some of you may be wondering what is the Humboldtian cosmos then. So he has quite a lot of discussion of this in the opening of the first volume, and so I'm reducing several pages into 4 brief lines on top. Cosmos, he deliberately resurrected the ancient Greek word, referring to the assemblage of all things in heaven and earth. This is, by the way, a 19th century translation. We are still awaiting a modern translation of Cosmos, I hope soon. Or universe, order of the world, and adornment of this universal order. So what I have, and the italics are my interpretive work on this, the physical universe is distinct from but conjoined with the mind insofar as mind composes or assembles the pluriverse into this universe that is what beauty, ornament, and order, that is art, and science. In other words, there will always be, in Humboldt's thinking, a physical universe apart from our minds, apart from us. It evolves on cosmic and geological timescales, but the cosmos, in Humboldt's thinking, is composed on historical timescales in the reciprocal interaction of mind and materiality. So in this day of environmental stresses and global warming, what's at threat is not the physical cosmos, is not the physical universe, excuse me, but the cosmos, this grand historical drama that's been playing out over millennia. That is this reciprocal interaction of mind with nature. Well, this kind of grand integrative vision became a victim of modernism's diagnostic split between nature and culture, science and literature, which we still tag with C.P. Snow's tired phrase, the two cultures. To make matters worse, then, in succeeding volumes, Humboldt tried to make all the findings of modern science available to to the public. Of course, they couldn't be finished, as Humboldt himself realized, and he died in 1859. Midway through the fifth volume, he'd gotten from the stellar bodies of farthest space to the granite rocks of Russia, died leaving the organic and the human realms unwritten. Hence, the importance of Ansicht in der Natur, and one reason why I think it works so well as a first step into his thinking, because it was the closest we have to a finished work by Humboldt. I even polished, the essays themselves, carefully composed. I think of it as a gem whose 7 crafted facets were designed to reflect, in the sense of aspects or views, the whole of the natural cultural cosmos. So instead of attempting the whole survey of all the universe insofar as we know it, it's a selection, a kind of handful of vignettes centered on places that he had experienced and savored and treasured in his memory. They're Wordsworthian spots of time that helped him keep faith through this turmoil of war and conflict, then offered to the public. It was, in essence, a pocket cosmos, right? There it is, the whole, in the most popular edition in the United States. So that pocket cosmos, well, it borrows the travel narrative form without insisting too much on that forward engine, so it lingers and savors and thinks. And as I'll argue in a moment, because I'm very interested, I've been very influenced by Ottmar's thinking, the movement comes in a different dimension. Well, the order of these essays, and I don't want to belabor this in the interest of time, but I'll try to go through this very swiftly. In working on this edition, sensed a kind of pattern to them, and finally, as I laid them all out, it came to me that it looks something like this. The first, Steppes and Deserts, Humboldt takes us inland from the ocean to consider the great plains or llanos of Venezuela, where it's all planetary surface. There is no water, there are no elevations, no hills, it's flat, there's very little life. Barrenness, desert, hard planetary matter asserts itself here as the limiting condition for life on Earth, and thus for the origins and fate of human civilizations, which he details. In the concluding essay, he takes us back out from the interior to now the Pacific Ocean, providing a kind of narrative and thematic closure, lingering on the way in the Inca village of Cajamarca to record his poignant conversation with the young son of Astropilco, descendant of Inca monarchs. So, the center of the book, the ideas for a physiognomy of plants, surveys the entirety of this planetary organism, an important keystone theoretical essay. Becomes a kind of grand global tapestry of visual forms grouped into landscape economies as indexed by plant types. Here is one of the origin of plant ecology, perhaps of ecological thinking more generally. So in between we've got two pairs of diptychs. The first pair, The Waters of the Orinoco and Nocturnal Voices or Nocturnal Wildlife, it takes us up the river. And the first is an essay about flow and water and atmosphere and light. And the second is about sound and voices, and the voices of the animals and the voices of nature, including a call for the renewal of human language through attentiveness to the impress of nature on our minds, on our thinking, on our language. The second pair of essays, the second diptych, go from surface to depth to explore deep dynamic causes, first of planetary forces in the volcano essay, where a wonderful phrase, he calls volcanoes intermediary earth springs. And volcanoes are how the depths of the earth communicate to us on the surface. So, speaking to us of the deep dynamic forces that govern the very structure of the planet. But when it comes to this funny little thing, the vital force, something very odd happens here. This is this place where he should be talking about the deep dynamic origins of life. He hits a wall. There is no scientific theory that addresses this. So he inserts this very odd little allegory on the vital force that he had written in the 1790s and almost immediately renounced. So why include a fanciful fiction in this 1849 publication in which he didn't believe? To mark the space of ignorance. This is not just a book about knowledge, what we know, it's a book about what we don't know. To display the rupture that lies at the heart of science. Now, ironically, Charles Darwin was working on this problem, but Charles Darwin was working in secret to fill exactly this gap. So taken together, these 7 essays describe an arc, beginning with the shape of the planet as it structures the history of living things on its surface. He turns to the flow of waters across that surface, then the flow of sounds and voices through the atmosphere, climaxes with a theory of visual pattern and form, followed by flanked portraits of the invisible causes of natural forms, first geological, then organic, and closes with a passage through human history, a study in European conquest and indigenous survivance. Well, if this were all, Views of Nature would be an innovative but still normal book. What makes the text Humboldtian and hence typically singular is its paratext. The scores, hundreds of pages of annotations in the book, keyed to virtually every paragraph. So here's the second paragraph of the book, and I won't take the time to read it because I know we're very short on time, but you get this wonderful opening from the luxuriant fullness of organic life. This is from our new translation. And you drop down towards the middle. The natives call these phenomena banks. Well, you want to read past that, of course, but if you pause, there's that number 2. This is the second annotation. And if you then look up number 2, you'll get a dense 2-page essay on this phenomenon that he's calling banks and how the native word, it just starts to spin off on all these associations with this concept. And this is, like I say, there are hundreds of these. These, if the 7 essays are the finished sort of threads tucked in front of the tapestry in these extraordinary annotations, which I can't take the time to really show you because that would take a while, flip the fabric over and show us the unfinished backside, all the loose threads, tangled and dangling, knowledge in the process of raveling and unraveling, revealing the labor that it took to weave all those threads into a whole picture. So these 7 views are, in a sense, pictures, yes, Gemälde or paintings. Yet for Humboldt, every picture must reveal the act of its own composition. So some of these annotations grow into entire finished essays on their own account. Disquisitions on the cross-cultural practice of eating earth, on Amazonian petroglyphs, on indigenous peoples who build their houses in trees, on the use of camels as domestic animals, on currents and vegetations and phosphorescence of seawater, and on it goes. Some of them spin off into fragments. Some of them land us in morasses of uncertainties, questions yet unresolved, controversy still unsettled, science still too raw to package on knowledge. One even verges on a Darwinian-style theory of evolution, verges, almost. To click on a Humboldtian fact, like that word banks, is to drop into a vertiginous fractal universe where one's scale shifts erratically across self-similar layers of knowledge from the intensely local, handheld, or stand-upon, right, physical object, physical place at one end to these wildly global, wholly imaginative abstractions at the other, and the effect is to destabilize the essays, right? Without the annotations, they would seem sufficiently coherent and shapely, but the annotations puncture that coherence, riddling it with wormholes that are dimensionally open, both spatially and temporally, dropping the unwary reader into astonishing worlds in bewildering array. That is, this is a book that is simultaneously finished and shapely and polished and radically unfinished. It's shaped without being bounded. So here's where the meaning, and I thank you, Otmar, I can now skip this section of the word Ansichten. There is no equivalent in English to this combination of, I'll simply add the sense of on-looking as a way of seeing becomes in Humboldt an exercise. Again, that's a sense of opinion or the view, a point of view, becomes a way of exercising Bildung or self-education, right? So it's an exercise, it's a doing, a performance. So these are 7 performances of self-education, right? In other words, this is a little book. It's rather bigger on the inside. So Humboldt's experimental and multi-layered writing found no imitators, and you could say, well, that's because who else could pull it off? Only Humboldt could do this. So, you know, one clue to why not is revealed in the flattening of the sense of Humboldt's views or pictures as an accomplished flat. The word harmony is often invoked in discussions of Humboldt. And I'm sorry, everywhere I see in Humboldt, there's no harmony. There's tensions and conflicts and turmoil and extreme dynamisms. So that sense of trying to stabilize into pictures tends to control the way, at least in the United States, people think of Humboldt. So that could be part of why there are no models, no imitators of Humboldt, no development of this way of writing. But I think there's a deeper ideological reason. And so now I'm moving to my conclusion. In my involvement with this translation, you know, the worst words of all were the title. So, views, well, that is an inadequate translation of Ansichten. Nature, nature itself is not the word that we wanted to use. There is an excellent equivalent in English for what Humboldt does. It's ecology, but that word came into existence only as a result of Humboldt's work. So it is anachronistic to use it. So had we been trying for accuracy in the translation, it would have come to something like self-educational onlookings that actively compose something that will eventually be called ecology. For some reason, University of Chicago rejected that. So anyway, the problem lies precisely here with our sort of post-Humboldtian ideology of nature as that which is not human, which is separate from and apart from human culture. And here I'll just touch into a critique, a well-known critique by Timothy Morton, saying nature writing partly militates against ecology by setting nature apart as an object over there, the pristine wilderness, establishing the very separation it seeks to abolish. By contrast, careful readers of Humboldt will find no separations, no wilderness, because his nature is never over there. but this many-folded emergence, material, economic, spiritual, linguistic, cultural, folded together, that can be precipitated into a kind of temporary Ansichten view, right? But even as it's happening, it's dissolving again into this planetary meshwork. So the extraordinary feature of this is that it actually does, I think, hold together. It is a shape without a frame. Right? So aesthetically, it's a very, very interesting object, this genre, these forms that he creates. Anyway, one can imagine what a Humboldtian tradition might have looked like, had American writers at least taken it up. Well, the final surprise here is that American writers did take it up. I could talk here about Walt Whitman, who uses cosmos as his controlling image for leaves of grass, and you can, well, there's a whole other lecture. I'll dwell for a moment, concluding moment instead, on a very much more scientific version of this from Henry David Thoreau. And here is an intriguing quotation from a letter he wrote to the American Association for the Advancement of Science when he had to put his cards on the table and explain where his loyalties were. And as you can see, he says, I'm an observer of nature generally. The character of my observations, insofar as they're scientific, may be inferred from the fact I'm especially attracted by such books of science as Gilbert White's Selborne and Humboldt's Aspects of Nature. So that tells me the linkage with Gilbert White, the kind of popularity of Humboldt in that beloved classic of natural history. Gilbert White was associated with Humboldt's Aspects of Nature. This is indeed Humboldt's most accessible and popular book, a point of reference. But more importantly, Thoreau's further step of aligning himself with the avant-garde, Humboldt gives an important clue to how Thoreau became such an innovator in science, not by turning away from aesthetics, not by turning away from science, but by practicing a rigorous empirical science through a Humboldtian aesthetic. In recent years, a succession of scientists have publicly claimed Thoreau as a forerunner to their particular discipline. A manifold nature indeed. I take this to be an immensely promising development for all of us who care about Humboldt. Evidence, I hope, that the project of translating Humboldt for our time still has transformative potential. Thank you.